أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
So alhamdulillah, last week we finished up tayammum. We discussed half of it a few weeks prior to that, and then last week we finished it up. Anybody can remind us, those who were here last week, what we covered last week in tayammum? Before last week's class, we discussed those things that you can do tayammum with, right? We mentioned a simple rule, which we can, through that rule, we can deduce which items tayammum is suitable with and which items you cannot do tayammum with, right? So the rule is that any material that cannot be burnt by fire and it cannot be melted through fire, then you can do tayammum with those materials. The example is like bricks. You have concrete, limestone, these type of materials, tayammum is allowed. You could use these for tayammum. Why? Because they're not burnt by fire, they're not melted by fire. Right? So anything which isn't like that, anything which is burnt by fire, which can be melted by fire, for example, like gold, silver, with those items, those materials, tayammum cannot be performed with those. Last week was pretty simple class, straightforward. We discussed what is necessary to do in tayammum, and we discussed those acts which are sunnat in tayammum. So, as a reminder, if anybody could tell us how many acts were fard or necessary in tayammum, through which without doing them, tayammum is not valid.
3?
Yes, there were 3.
Depends on how you classify.
Yeah. Depends on how you classify. So we have 3 altogether, right? The first was
Niyyah.
yes, intention, right? We discussed in tayammum intention is fard, but in wudu we don't say that an intention is necessary. It's sunnat in wudu, but in tayammum it's fard, right? The main reasoning behind it is Allah says in the Quran, فَتَيَمَّمُوا صَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا, right? If you're incapable of finding water, there's no water within a 1-mile radius, then you should do tayammum with pure soil. And tayammum, the linguistic meaning of tayammum actually means al-qasd, intention, to make an intention, right? So that's one of the reasonings why the intention is fard. And another reasoning is that whatever material we use for tayammum, whether it be sand, soil, whether it be brick, limestone, concrete, that material in essence, it does not purify you. In contrast to water. Water itself is used for purification. That's why we don't say it's necessary to make intention when you're performing wudu. But in tayammum, when you're performing tayammum with sand, sand is not used usually to purify yourself, right? It's used in the absence of water. So that's why, another reason why we say that intention is fard in tayammum, right? So we had the intention that was fard. Now what else was fard in tayammum?
Wiping the face once.
Yes, wiping the face once. But what do we have to do prior to that?
You have to hit the ground
Yes,
with the dust.
strike the floor, or whichever material that you're using for tayammum. If it's brick, concrete, if it's sand, you strike that, right, first. Then you make sure you dust off your hands, wipe the dust off of your hands, and then you wipe your face. And we discussed in wudu which parts of the face are necessary to wash in wudu. So similarly in tayammum, those parts of the face have to be wiped, right? So that was the second. And the third was? Yes, just the arms up until and including the elbows. And similarly with the face, prior to you have to strike the earth. Similarly, before you wipe your arms, you have to strike the earth. Right? So once you strike it, and then you wipe your face. And then the second time you strike the earth, then your right arm until the elbow, including the elbow, and then your left arm until the elbow, and you include the elbow as well. So these are some things which were fard in tayammum, right? So what about the sunan of tayammum? Yes?
So the rocks with dust or without dust?
It doesn't have to have dust on them. If there's a brick, you could use a brick for tayammum. It's not necessary for it to have dust on it. You could just place your hands on the brick and you could wipe your face with it. Right? Of course, attention has to be made that you're performing tayammum though.
If the brick, since it doesn't have any dust and we do it and we rub on it, we don't have to dust off because there's no dust anywhere, right?
Yeah, I mean if there's no dust, it's not necessary.
So we can use earth also, meaning like topsoil and stuff like that?
Soil can be used, yes. Again, it has to fall into that category. Fire cannot burn or melt it, right? So now, what were the sunan of tayammum? We mentioned a few of those, which is also pretty simple, straightforward, if anybody can recall.
Bismillah.
Yes, right, starting with Bismillah, that is one sunnat. Another one we mentioned was spreading the fingers prior to striking the earth, right? You spread your fingers, that's a sunnah. Another one was that you don't just strike it, you move your hands forward and you move them backwards, right? At the time of striking them on the earth. So that's another sunnah of tayammum. So these were some sunnah we discussed.
Just once, right? The sunnah is to move it.
Yes, just once. Now what breaks tayammum, that was also pretty straightforward. Anything that breaks wudu will break your tayammum. And then you add to that finding water. So if you find water which you can make wudu with, then your tayammum will break, right? So that was the tayammum. Today we will discuss Istinja, which is also very important pertaining to purifying ourselves, right? Yes?
Before you move on, can you just demonstrate tayammum for us?
Sure. Let me just take off my sweater. So in the beginning, firstly, intention needs to be made. It doesn't have to be made verbally. You can make it in your heart that I'm intending to perform tayammum, right? So firstly, we mentioned, so just the fard will be what? Strike the earth and then wipe your face, right? So if it's sand, for example, then there will be dust on your hands. So you have to make sure you dust your hands off because you don't want to get sand on your face. So you'll dust them off, you remove that, and then you'll wipe your face, right? And the parts that are necessary to wash in wudu, you have to make sure those parts are wiped, right? Even the parts in between the sideburns and the earlobes, these parts, you have to make sure you wipe them, right? And every portion of the face, you have to make sure it's wiped, right? And then again, the second time, you will strike the earth, and then the right arm, including the elbow, you'll wipe it in its entirety, and then the left arm in its entirety, you'll wipe it, right? So those are just the fara'id. And we mentioned the sunnah was to spread your fingers, and then when striking the earth, you'll move your hands forward and then backwards. So these are some of the sunnah of tayammum, right?
Yeah.
So again, yes, Istinja. We're going to be talking about Istinja today. There are some etiquettes of using the bathroom, right? So these are pretty simple. Prior to entering the bathroom, we enter the bathroom with our left foot. Another thing is that the dua that is read, we don't read the dua inside the bathroom. You're not supposed to do any type of zikr, you're not supposed to read any type of Quran when you're in the bathroom. So when you're reading the dua for entering the bathroom, you read it prior to entering the bathroom, right? The dua is Bismillahi, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-khubuthi wal-khaba'ith. You can find this online or certain dua books. I have it, as I mentioned a few months ago. Muslim Du'as is one book. It mentions all the du'as that are related in the hadith we could use every day in our life. So the dua to be recited when entering the bathroom is prior to entering it, right? Hadith says that whenever Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam intended to enter the bathroom, he would recite this dua, right? Now when he would enter and he would be fully entered into the bathroom, then he would recite this dua. It should be read prior to that, right? And you enter with your left foot. Now, when using the bathroom, scholars mention that it is makruh tahrimi to face the qibla or have your back towards the qibla. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam clearly mentioned in the hadith that when you use the bathroom, he says, "La tastaqbilu al-qibla," do not face the qibla, wa la tastadbiruha, do not have your back towards the qibla, right? And then afterwards he says, "Lakin shariqu wa gharribu." He says, rather face towards the east or face towards the west. Now he was addressing the people who were living in Medina, right? Here in America, our qibla is east. So this hadith, if we just take it literally, face east or face west, you might get confused that our qibla is east, northeast. Right? So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is actually addressing the people of Medina. So what is intended by his statement is that whatever your qibla may be, don't directly face it and don't have your back towards the qibla, right? Try to move away from it. Some of our toilets may be such that that's how they're built. They're built and they're facing the qibla. So when we're using the bathroom, we should adjust ourselves in such a way where we're not directly facing the qibla, or our backs are not directly facing the qibla, right? This scholar mentioned this makruh tahrimi, so we need to make sure that we refrain from it. It's not necessary to now, take out your entire toilet and now fix it and face it in another direction. If you do that, then okay, that's according to your taqwa, but that's not necessary. Another etiquette of using the bathroom is that when you enter into the bathroom, you should have your topi on, right? Wearing the cap, that's also a sunnat and is one of the etiquettes. As I mentioned earlier, there also, when you're using the bathroom, there shouldn't be you should not talk, right? No Quran, no form of dhikr should be done. Right? Even the ulama mentioned that even if one sneezes, he shouldn't say Alhamdulillah, rather he should say it in his heart. Right? Because once you're in the bathroom, no form of dhikr should be done. right? Anything, if a person has a ring and now the ring has, for example, Allah's name or Prophet's name or the name of some type of angel, he should not take that into the bathroom with him, right? He should put it in his pocket, right? If it's in a person's pocket, then that's fine, right? But now if it's something that he's wearing, for example, a ring or anything else that has the name of Allah in it, then one shouldn't take that into the bathroom with him. Another thing also very important is standing and urinating, right? Unless the person has a valid excuse, he should not stand, he cannot stand and urinate. It does come in a hadith, yes, the Prophet ﷺ did once stand and urinate. And that was because, the ulama mentioned various reasons, but the most famous reason is that the place where he was urinating, it was a place where there was a lot of trash around that area. So if he were to squat and use the bathroom, then that would result in his garments becoming impure. So since it wasn't possible for him to squat or be seated and use the bathroom, that's why he stood up, right? And there are many other reasonings that the ulama, the scholars mentioned, but this is the most famous reason. So unless a person has a valid excuse, he should not stand up and urinate, right? It's Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is mentioned in a hadith, right? He said, "Istanziu min al-bawl," that refrain from the drops of urine. He says, فَإِنَّ عَامَّةَ عَذَابِ الْقَبْرِ مِنْهُ, because most of the punishments in the grave are due to this reason, that the person did not refrain from the drops of urine when he was urinating. He wouldn't be careful, whether it be through, he didn't sit down, he would stand up and urinate, he wasn't cautious of it, now the drops would end up on his clothes. So this is something which is very serious and we need to take it seriously. Unless we have an actual excuse, a valid excuse, we should not stand up and urinate. We should always try to sit down and urinate. Even if, the common thing is to stand up and urinate. Sometimes if you go to school, you might think that other people make fun of us. What are you doing? Why are you sitting down and urinating? This reminds me of the hadith, I think it was Salman Farsi, if I'm not mistaken. The Muslims came to him and they told him, your Prophet teaches you everything. He even teaches you how to use the bathroom. They said it in a way condescending manner. They said it to make fun of him, right? Salman Farsi didn't let that affect him. He stood up firmly and he says, yes, he says, our Prophet teaches us everything. Right? So this is the beauty of the religion of Islam, that every single aspect of our life, there are guidelines, right? There's teaching of the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam in regards to every single aspect of our life, right? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Ana mithlu abikum," I'm like your father. وَعَلِّمُكُمْ كُلُّ شَيْءٍ. In what aspect? That I teach you everything, right? Every single thing, every single aspect of your life, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has explained it to us, right? There are etiquettes and there are sunan in every single aspect of our life that we can follow Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Another thing is that when we are making istinja, we should not make istinja with the right hand, right? The left hand should be used for istinja. Now in regards to what can be used, what items can you use for istinja and what can't be used, the unsuitable items, the ulama, they mentioned, for example, you cannot use bones. First thing you need to realize that back in the day, they didn't have toilet paper, so what would they use? They would use stones or they would use lumps of clay or soil, right? That would be like their toilet paper back then. They didn't have it at that time. So the scholars have mentioned that unsuitable items which you cannot use or which are makruh, disliked to use for istinja, are bones, any impure items, for example, like droppings of other animals, to use those, right? Zamzam water, for example, you cannot use that for istinja, right? Zamzam water you can't use to remove any type of impurity. So you're not allowed to use Zamzam water to remove any type of impurity, right? So the suitable items are, of course, water. You could use water. Stones, as I mentioned, in the past they would use stones. Clods of the earth, right, like lumps of soil or lumps of clay you could use. Cloth you cannot use. You cannot use cloth. And you cannot use paper, excluding toilet paper, right? But just paper to write on, you cannot use those items for istinja either. So now we come to the actual istinja itself. When is it fard to do istinja and when is it sunnah to do istinja? So the ulama, the scholars mentioned that if the impurity spreads more than the private part, outside of the private part area, then it's mentioned that if it's the size, more than the size of a dirham, right? And we mentioned the size of a dirham is like the size of a 50-cent coin, which is like, the diameter is like 3 centimeters almost. So if it's that amount, the impurity reaches that amount, then it will be fard to do istinja, right? You have to do istinja. Your salat will not be accepted if you do not do istinja. Right, that's one scenario. If it's more than the size of a dirham, than the size of a 50-cent coin. The second is, if it's not more, but it is the exact amount of a 50-cent coin, then they mention that it is wajib in that scenario. So now, in the case of when it does not spread more than the private part, in that case, the scholars say that it is sunnat in that scenario to do istinja. But what would be more virtuous or the best in that scenario would be you still do istinja. It won't be necessary, it will be a sunnat, but it's better to still do it and not leave it out in that scenario. So those are the three scenarios. Again, I'll mention that one is if the impurity spread and is more than the size of a dirham or a 50-cent coin, then it's fard. If it's the size of a 50-cent coin, then it will be wajib. And if it is not spread more than the private part area, then it will be sunnah to do istinja in that scenario. Right? So now what would be the method? The method that the scholars mention is that you first use the toilet paper and then afterwards you use the water. Right? That will be the method of doing istinja. Right? So yes, first would be to use the toilet paper and then would be to use the water. It is also, the scholars mention that it is permissible just to suffice with water. Only using water, that is also allowed. Right? Another thing, the scholars mentioned that when you're using the bathroom, it is also very important. This is another term which is known as istibra. When you're using the bathroom, to make sure that all of the impurities, the discharge, leaves your body, right? Because sometimes, say for urinating, for example, and we don't make sure that all of it has exited from our system, has left our system, then it's possible that the drops of urine might come out, and we might not even know about it, and our wudu is broken, right? And we're praying salat without our wudu. So this is something which we need to be very careful about. Scholars mention that there are many things which they say that you should do istibra. Istibra means to make sure that everything is out of the system, right? All the discharge leaves the body. And they said this could be achieved through, for example, like coughing, for example, right? If a person, any method a person can use to make sure that all of it leaves your system. One method that they mention is that to lean a little bit towards your left side, towards your left leg when you're using the bathroom. He says this is something which will be effective in making sure that everything leaves the system, right? So once you do that, then it'll have more an effect in making sure that everything comes out, right? So again, just to summarize, we mentioned in regards to istinja, the three scenarios, right? One of them was fard, to do istinja, one of them was wajib, one of them was sunnah, right? We mentioned the most preferred method is to first use the toilet paper and then use the water, right? And then again, we have to make sure that everything has left our system, right? All the discharge is gone and nothing remains, so that, you know, we might not break our wudu later on, or drops of urine will leave and exit from our body later on. That pretty much covers this part of istinja. Next week, inshallah, we will discuss the impurities, najasat, and the removal of the impurities. If you have impurity on your clothes, for example, then what is the method of removing it? If there's impurities, for example, on the carpet, then how would you go about removing those? And inshallah, after that, we will do masah on leather socks. We'll discuss that, and then we'll move on to salat, inshallah. So the next 2-3 weeks, we'll finish up taharat, cleanliness, and then we'll move on to salat, inshallah. So anybody have any questions? You can ask, inshallah. Any questions? Jazakallah khairan for your time. May Allah reward you.